We are talking Egypt, and we're talking the retail sector specifically. And before we begin, I want to point out a certain chart. And it's this one. We have Egyptian inflation surging to 30%. That is urban prices, urban inflation surging 30% after Egypt opted to float the pound back in November. That is obviously putting pressure on various retailers. And speaking of the retail sector, right now we have a very big name in the retail sector. We have the CEO of Mاجد الفطيم, Alan Pajani, joining us now. Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So when you look at a chart like that, do you get a little bit nervous about opening a mega mall in Egypt?
No.
Why not?
Well, you know, we've been in Egypt. Mاجد الفطيم have been in Egypt now for almost 20 years. So it is not the first time that we go through a situation like the current one. Egypt has a lot to offer, and of course it's going through very difficult times and some serious challenges. But if I look at Egypt today and the outlook, I think we are at the end. We start to see the end of the tunnel. I think that in 2016 and early 2017, Egypt has had very good progress on some very important structural reforms. Of course, you're pointing out to the inflation, which is absolutely true, but this is the result of floating the currency. I think that in the coming year, in 2017, this will start to offset itself. That's on the one side. On the other side, I think that the important structural reforms that have been taken place, although it took some time, although we would have liked for things to come faster, are actually steps in the right direction, and very tough steps. I mean, you're talking about cutting subsidy, you're talking about fiscal consolidation, you're talking about floating the currency. These are very tough steps. And if you look at the market, being in the retailers, but also being in the financial markets, when you look at the floating, at the issuance that the Egyptian government did in January, that was oversubscribed 3 times.
Right.
It was a sign of confidence, and I think that the Egyptian economy is starting to show some positive signs. Of course, investments like ours in Egypt are extremely important. We are one of the largest investors in the construction and the retail sectors, and this has a very big impact on the local economy.
Well, Alan, you're on the ground in Egypt. Give us some color on what you're seeing in terms of consumer demand right now. You know, are domestic consumers recovering now? Are you seeing interest from foreign consumers who might be visiting the country?
Egypt has a very deep consumer segment and very deep consumer demand. The reality is there is still growth in consumer demand. This being said, there is a change in pattern of consumption that has been impacted by the last 2 years. That's absolutely true. And this also has been impacted by the change in the offering in the market, given the restrictions on import that were there, primarily driven by the lack of foreign currency. So I would say that Egyptian consumer demand is still good. We're seeing more and more tourism coming into Egypt. I think in the last month we've seen some very good news in that respect. So overall, we're positive on the outlook.
And setting Egypt aside for 1 second, when you look at the region and when you look at potential areas for growth, what catches your eye?
Well, I mean, we look very closely on opportunities. We still believe that there's a lot of growth potential in the GCC as well. As you know, Mاجد الفطيم is growing in the region. We're growing in the GCC. We're getting deeper in our local markets, but we're also growing in East Africa. We've entered Kenya. We entered Kenya this year. So there is still room of growth in our current markets, but also in some adjacencies.